First, I'd just like to say thank you for the AERA Montessori Special Interest Group for bringing anti-bias and equity into the Montessori research space. This is a very important topic. And I also just I really enjoyed everything I've heard so far, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. I know that Aize starts with gratitudes. I am going to start with a land acknowledgement. I like to honor the indigenous people of all of our respective cities and states because we're all over. The original protectors of the lands that were stolen and we now benefit from. We now call this land the United States of America. I would also like to honor, acknowledge all of the people impacted by the two pandemics currently present in the United States, which is COVID-19 and is impacting the lives of Black and Brown folks disproportionately. And the second pandemic that is present in the United States is racism and the continued brutalization and death of Black and Brown people by excessive force from law enforcement. Please give a respectful and brief moment of silence. I'd like to start with a quote from Amira Montessori from Education and Peace. Human history teaches us that peace means the forcible submission of the conquered to domination once the invader has consolidated his victory. The loss of everything the vanquished hold dear and the end of their enjoyment of the fruits of their labor and their conquest. The vanquished are forced to make sacrifices as if they are the only ones who are guilty and merit punishment, simply because they have been defeated. Meanwhile, the victors flaunt the rights they feel they have won over the defeated populace, who remain the victims of the disaster. Such conditions may mark the end of an actual combat, but they certainly cannot be called peace. The real moral scourge stems, in fact, from the very set of circumstances. When I read this quote, what I think about in terms of our context in the United States is the stolen lands of indigenous people. The enslaved Africans that were brought in order to work labor for work free of charge and to build America, Jim Crow laws, as well as lynchings, inequities in housing, food justice, and inequities in education, the oppression and racism that exist in all educational settings, both Montessori and non-Montessori. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amira Mogaji. I am the AMS board president. I'm also a founding board member for Montessori for Social Justice. I served as a CEO and head of school of a Montessori charter school on the East Coast. For several years, I was the principal of an AMS accredited Montessori school in Southwest Michigan. And most recently, I served as the chief academic officer of a ABAR focused Montessori school. But my most important role is that I'm a Black mother of Black children. And as a Black mother of Black children, I have an intersection. I have an intersection with education because I'm an educator. And because of that, I know about the oppression and the racism that exists, both as a child once in school as a Black student, but also as a parent and an educator. And because of that, my husband and I, we have rituals and routines that we do with our children to help bolster them. Because if they go to a school and they don't have a sense of belonging, if they're not cared for or loved or acknowledged or valued or respected, we want to make sure we create this armor around them so they know who they are, they know their culture, and they know if something comes at them that they can stick to, oh no, I know who I am. I'm a king or I'm a queen. I am proud to be Black. And so with that, we do things like play different songs and read different books. And so I'm coming to this work. These are my actual children. I'm coming to this work thinking about brown-skinned girls who are my daughters and Black Boy Joy, which are my sons. Another piece of my identity is that I'm a doctoral student, and my research is directly linked to my why, because I believe that all children should have that sense of belonging. All institutions should be anti-racist. All institutions should dismantle and disrupt racism and oppression. And so my research, the purpose of my research is to develop an anti-bias, anti-racist curriculum product to improve an educational organization's process for providing the foundational knowledge and practical applications of ABAR strategies to staff in order to create and sustain an ABAR educational community and increase equitable access to education for all students. I just want to bring critical race theory into this space quickly. And critical race theory, CRT movement, began in the 1970s, and it was motivated by the notion that the civil rights movement had been stalled and it wasn't really moving and having the same impact. And so this movement is a collection of activists and scholars engaged in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. Some of the key principles for that work are Derek Bell, the late Derek Bell, as well as Alan Freeman and Richard Delgado. And there are others who joined that movement. And since that time, the movement has offshoots. For instance, there is a lens that critical race theory is looked through in terms of education, in terms of other marginalized communities, Latinx, Indigenous folks, LGBTQ. And so this movement is still around, but these are some of the beginnings. I'm going to talk just a little bit about a few basic tenets of critical race theory. Racism is, and it comes from Critical Race Theory by Delgado and Stefanik, 2017. Racism is ordinary and not aberrational. I'm having trouble with I'm sorry, my charge is not working. It's normal science, the usual way society does business, the common everyday experience of most people of color in this country. Most would agree that our system of white over color ascendancy serves important purposes, both psychic and material, from the dominant group. And it makes me think about white supremacy, white privilege, oppression, colorblind or formal conceptions of equality expressed in rules that insist only on treatment that is in the same across the board, can thus remedy only the most blatant forms of discriminations. For instance, a color blindness around everybody gets stopped if there's a traffic violation, if your taillight is out, or if you go through a stop sign. But some of the blatant and egregious discriminations are also noticeable, but they also can lead to really negative circumstances. For instance, the data for likelihood of Black drivers in Missouri getting stopped for traffic violations compared to white drivers in Missouri has increased steadily since 2015. The data says that in 2015, if you're a Black driver, there's a 70% likelihood that you're going to get stopped compared to your white counterpart. In 2016, 75%. In 2017, there's an 85% more likelihood than your white counterpart. And if you're a Black driver in Missouri in 2018, it was a 91% likelihood over your white counterpart that you will get stopped. In 2019, the data indicates that Black drivers in Missouri were 40% more likely to get searched during a traffic stop, but also 40% more likely to get arrested during a traffic violation stop than their white counterparts. It doesn't really seem super important, right? Yes, it's disproportionate and there's a disparity, but as we all know, a traffic stop for a Black driver could mean death. So I would like to move forward in this conversation by utilizing the Montessori learning triangle, where the preparation of the teacher and the preparation of the environment guides and facilitates the learning of the child and providing that child an opportunity to reach their full potential. I'm going to focus on teacher in terms of the Montessori learner triangle, teacher and school community, as we think about transformation of self. An ordinary teacher cannot be transformed into a Montessori teacher, but must be created anew, having rid herself of pedagogical prejudices from education of a new world, for a new world. So in my research, there's three components. The first two components are the essential elements of the research and the work. And then the final component is what the expectation is at the end. And so for my research around the AERA year-long professional development, it is essential that there's organizational commitment to year-long job-embedded professional development. I'm getting it mixed, I'm sorry. Job embedded professional development changes professional practices that can lead to institutional change. Malik 2016. And this job embedded professional practice is guided by ABAR goals and objectives throughout the year. And so that as you move through the year, there are goals that you have to meet, and you learn about, you get foundational knowledge, and then you work to implement those things. Another essential component is the community of practice, because it's necessary, because this is not a class by class, individual by individual venture. We all need to do our own transformation for ourselves, but collectively, we cannot make an institutional change and an institutional shift unless we're all working on this together. So the community of practice, developing a community of practice that allows the participants to collectively engage in continuous reflection of their professional practices and instructional planning, Gutierrez 2019. And so what I would like the outcome to be is that school-wide implementation of high fidelity ABAR practices and strategies. And so that throughout this year, while people are getting new learnings and they're collaborating and they're reflecting with their colleagues, they're able to transfer that into the setting, not only the classroom setting, but school-wide setting, and that all staff members should participate. School-wide implementation of high fidelity ABAR practices and strategies. Teachers engaging in year-long professional development will enter the experience with varied levels of experience in the content, as well as different levels of motivation to engage in adult development. Facilitation that includes collaboration and teamwork will support changes in professional practices. Nielstrom and Anderson, 2017. When we think about inclusive and equitable Montessori spaces, and lots of the speakers have talked about a representation and things like that in Montessori spaces, it has to be very intentional work. But I just want to offer that when we think about the Montessori triangle, and we think about the preparation of the teacher, and we think about the preparation of the environment, and we think about all the things we can do in terms of representation. And we're looking at diverse literature, and so that we are looking at joy and Blackness and liberation and resistance. And we're not just looking at slave stories, and we're reading stories about indigenous peoples and that they're still here, and all the things that marginalized groups and BIPOC offer the world, that we need to understand that posters and books and changing Montessori materials is not going to be enough. It will not necessarily change teacher practice. So when we think about that transformation of self and that ongoing year-long professional development, it is essential that we continue to do that work. And that, yes, we need representation. Yes, we need windows and mirrors and windows. And yes, we do need culturally responsive pedagogy. Yes, we do need culturally relevant materials in the classroom, representation for our community. And we need to make sure we're working on ourselves. We need to make sure we're working on our policies and our processes. We're making sure that all children have access. We're making sure that we're valuing our community and our parents. All of those pieces have to happen at the same time. When I think about research informs practice, I think about, the African culture and think about storytelling. So as a example of the expectation of the outcome that I would like after the year-long professional development, working in a community of practice, and what I would like for children in Montessori classrooms and classrooms everywhere, I'm going to share this story. And the story is, I love my skin. And so the cutie in the picture is Barakatullah. And Barakatullah is my son. And he attended the school that I led in the school district, the Montessori school that I led in the school district. And in this picture, he's in the kindergarten. And in this school, we had a very clear vision. We had very clear goals. And as you would know, every year you have professional goals that you have to create as the principal and as teachers. And of course, there's academic goals. So there's literacy goals, there's math goals, but in our school, we made sure that there was also goals around equity and inclusion and culturally responsive pedagogy, and making sure that all of our children felt like they belong, and belonging in the deepest sense of the word, belonging where it's to their core, that they know that they're loved, they're honored, they're valued, they're respected, and that space is for them. I had a conversation with Michael Floor a few months ago, and he said something that resonated with me, and I just love this quote, in that the air feels different in the room that was prepared for you. And that's what I want for all children. And so my son attended this school, and so this was the vision. Everybody had their own personal goals around equity, inclusion, and making sure all children had access. And so Barakatullah comes up to me one day after school at home, and he goes, "Mommy, I love my skin." I said, "Oh yeah, I'm glad that you love your skin." He said, "Mommy, all skin is good." And I said, "Yes, all skin is good." Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, my husband and I are extremely intentional about teaching our children who they are, that they know their culture, that they know that they're Black and they're beautiful and they're great, and that we give them this armor. But I also knew that these are not words that I've ever used. These are not words that my husband has never used in order to bolster our children. And so I said, "Well, tell me more. What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, who said that to you?" He said, "Well, Miss Yarworth, my teacher. She said that all skin is good. And she said that we talked about skin and everybody has different skin and all skin is good. So I love my skin." And although I was the principal of the school, and although I knew what the charge was, and although I knew what we believed and what we were working, what we were striving for, as a parent, it touched my heart in the deepest place. And I thought about Mrs. Yarworth and what she had to do. And so I went back to that Montessori triangle, and I thought about, this is the transformational work that she did in order to create that space for children so they can feel belonging to the deepest sense, so that he knows he has value. He's not looking someplace else to see what's better. He loves his own skin. And that is what I'm striving for through this research and through this work, is that every child has that feeling in every classroom, in every room, in every school in the United States. One Either education contributes to a movement of universal liberation by showing the way to defend and raise humanity, or becomes like one of those organs which has shriveled up by not being used during the evolution of the organism. Through education, we can make this difference. We can disrupt, we can dismantle, we can create spaces where children thrive and belong. And I just have two questions. Are you ready for the challenge as Montessori researchers? And I've seen lots of questions come up. And I know we have conferences, and I know we attend and we take notes and we think about these wonderful, great ideas. But are you ready for the challenge? Transformational change will require more than a one-time professional development. It is ongoing work and more research. Allison gave some excellent questions that were very specific, that people could dive into and figure out how we can make things better for kids. Are you ready to do the research and further this important work? And the last question that I offer out there is that, as you notice, I had the three components: the year-long job embedded professional development, the community of practice, and then what I would like to see as it translates into these transforms classrooms and these transforms institutions. But in order to figure out if it actually worked and the practices are being used effectively and making a difference, I would love to see a tool to measure the ongoing ABAR practices of the teachers and staff that kind of go through these types of training. I thank you for your time this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your conference.